With the help of Hashem, we are learning Megila Daf Ches. We left off on Daf Zayin Amid Beis, 7 lines, 8 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We began the sugya known as the Ein Bein sugya. Ein Bein means there is no difference between this and that except for. So we're going to constantly be bringing different, very diverse dinim, or very diverse topics in which A and B are on one hand very similar, but on the other hand they share one difference or perhaps a few differences. Now the last Ein Bein that we learned was Ein Bein Shabbos Liyam Kipurim. They both share commonalities. One may not work on either Shabbos nor on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is actually called Shabbos, Shabbosin. However, the Mishnah says, Elo, that if a person, God forbid, violates Shabbos, the punishment is a human punishment, skila, in Beis Din. If a person violates Yom Kippur by working on Yom Kippur, their punishment is the spiritual punishment of Kares. So we're going to be following up the sugya of Ein Bein Shabbos Liyam Kipurim, and let's see how many topics we can cover today. It's going to be a fascinating daf as far as learning about a whole smorgasbord of halachas. We're going to start with on Daf Ches, Ein Bein, 2 different types of vows prohibiting benefit one from the other, similarities again and their difference. We're going to have another Ein Bein Nedarim Linedavos. There is a vow and there is a gift. Ein Bein Zav Haroya Shtei Re'iyos L'Roya Shalosh Re'iyos. The din of a Zav is someone, a male, who has some sort of gonorrheal, seminal, unnatural emission, and it brings about a very stringent tumah. A person only becomes a zav if they have at least 2 of such emissions on 1 or on 2 consecutive days. Once they have 2 such emissions, they are called a zav, with all of the rules that we're going to learn regarding the zav. However, there is one difference in which if one has a 3rd emission, whether it is all 3 on the same day, or whether it's 3 on 2 days, or max 3 on 3, but back-to-back days, then the person does not become more tamei, but there'll be one difference, and that will be that person then will have to bring the korban of a zav at the end of the 7 clean day count and of the going to the mikveh, as we're going to go over these halachas. On Daf Ches Amid Beis, we're going to have Ein Bein Mitzoida Musgar LeMitzoida Muchlat. A Mitzoida is someone who develops some sort of skin ailment in which the pigment of the skin becomes white. That will be the first of the various symptoms. Then there's going to be other symptoms. For example, that the hair that is growing out of that part of the body, then after the skin became white, then the hairs turn white. What happens if a person has some of the symptoms but not all of the symptoms? In some scenarios, the kohen is going to declare that person to be a mitzoida musgar, which means he's going to be confined, waiting a week. Kohen is going to return after 7 days to see whether additional symptoms were added. If that were to happen, then he goes from being a mitzoida musgar, a confined mitzoida, into the status of a mitzoida muchlat, into a confirmed mitzoida. If no symptoms were added, if it remains the same, he goes into another 7-day period of being confined. Actually, at the end of the 14-day period, if everything stays the way it is, he becomes tahar. He only becomes muchlat if things gets worse. Doesn't have to get better, but if it didn't get worse, you become tahar. Even when the mitzoida is in the state of him being confined, before him being confirmed, he is a bona fide mitzoida. Again, Ein Bein, with all of the details that we will learn when we learn today's daf, but there'll be one difference, or the 2 differences that the Mishnah will enumerate between the mitzoida that's only confined versus the mitzoida that's confirmed. And if we will have time on Daf Ches Amid Beis, we're gonna learn the Mishnah at the end of the Amid that speaks about Ein Bein Sifrei Torah to Tefillin and Mezuzahs, and it's going to be a shocking Mishnah in which the Tanach, the Chachamim hold that a Sefer Torah may be written b'chol lashon in any language. And as we'll learn the sugya, it's not about fulfilling the mitzvah of writing of a Sefer Torah. The mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah has to be in Lashon HaKodesh. But you can write it in any other language and learn from it and fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah, versus Tefillin and Mezuzahs that may only be written in Lashon HaKodesh, and Chevre, let's buckle our seatbelts, because Mamash today, unlike yesterday, was exciting in one way. Today it's exciting in a different way. We will go through many halachas in very diverse areas in the Torah. Again, we are concluding the sugya 8 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Ein ben Shabbos liyem HaKippurim. Other Shabbos punishments, skila in human court and a beis din, bidei adam, and Yom Kippur, if one, God forbid, violates the malachos on Yom Kippur, then they are punished with kares. And we're going to have now we're going to introduce a Mishnah from a Masechta Makos, which will appear to contradict our Mishnah. Says the Gemara Tran Hassan, we learned in Makos, kol chayavei krisos. If a person violated any violation for which you're chayiv kares, but if that person will be flogged, shelaku. Now, remember the simple rule. Whenever God says, thou shalt not do X, Y, or Z, if the Torah doesn't specify the punishment, the default punishment of a violation of a negative commandment that's done by an action is malchus, in a beis din. However, like any punishment that's given in beis din, there are many preconditions. You have to be, the violator has to be forewarned, halachically, hasra'ah, with the details. There has to then be 2 kosher witnesses that testify in the beis din that the person indeed was warned and violated. In actuality, most violators won't be found guilty in a halachic beis din. But in the case where the person will be found guilty, and according to our Tana, even though the Torah prescribes the punishment of kares, but still there is also the punishment of malchus. If you indeed get malchus, nifteru midei krisosan, the person will be exempt from the punishment of kares. Almost the opposite of what we finished yesterday, learning the concept of kam lei miderabba midei, which is really the sugya we're going to have in Ksubas Perek Shlishi, that if you do one act that has 2 punishments, you get the more stringent punishment. Here, kares is certainly considered more stringent than getting malchus. Nevertheless, this Tana holds that in the case where you get malchus, obviously with tshuva, nothing goes without tshuva, then you'll be forgiven, so to say, and you won't be chayiv kares anymore. And the pasuk that the Tana brings, sheneman, it says in Parshas Kiseitze, when the Torah speaks about malchus, v'nikla achicha le'anecha, your brother will be demeaned, because when you get flogged, you get demeaned in front of your eyes. So Chazal learned, Rab Hananya learns, Kivan Shalaka, once he gets flogged, he becomes mamish like your brother spiritually, and he's forgiven, and there's no more kares. These are the words of Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, even though the Mishnah in Makos does not quote a consenting, a dissenting, a Tana that argues, but Chalukin olav chaveirav al Rab Hananya ben Gamliel. The other Tanoim disagreed with him. And you know what? Rabbi Yechanan didn't say from where he knew that. So says Rava, that Amri Bei Rav, that let me share you. In the yeshiva of Rav, they figured out the source of Rabbi Yechanan. You know what his source was? Our Mishnah, Tanina. It says in our Mishnah, Ein bein Yom Kippurim l'Shabbos, elo shezeh Shabbos udoini b'dei Adam. Again, if you were forewarned, if there were witnesses, but ultimately, God forbid, you get skila. V'zeh udoini b'dei kares. Now, says the students in the yeshiva of Rav, Rava quoting them, Ve'im isam, if our Tana would agree to Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel, that when you get malchus, you'll be exempt from kares, then one can argue that even when it comes to the violating of Yom Kippur, the punishment is also bidei Adam. Because you're going to get malchus, and then you'll be exempt from kares. Ida v'ida bidei Adam. And therefore, this is Rabbi Yechanan's source when he says that the Mishnah in Makos, which Taka only quotes Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel, is only Rabbi Hananya, and the other Tanoim disagree. That's referring to our Mishnah. So Amar Rav Nachman, that's not correct. I'll push back. Lav Dafka, our Mishnah cannot be used as the source of the statement of Rabbi Yechanan. And the Gemara is going to give 2 reasons. Number 1, maybe our Mishnah follows the Shita known and taught to us by Rabbi Yitzchak 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that holds Malchus b'chayove krisis leke. Whenever God, like he says, when God says thou shalt not do, and God does not prescribe any punishment, taka, then the punishment is that if you violated it through an action, and if there isn't a asay that can compensate, that can make up, you're going to get malchus. But whenever the Torah prescribes a punishment, and according to Rabbi Yitzchak, even if it is only a ruchniistic punishment, not bidei adam like kaddish, the bechlal there's no malchus. Oh, the Tanya Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, chayave kriso is bechlal hayu. He's speaking about the aroyos, when the Torah repeats that if a person has a relation with his sister, he's going to be chayiv kaddish. Even though that information, that statement was already written prior to. Why did God repeat or specify that if a person has a relation with one sister, you're going to be chayiv kaddish l'doina, to teach you that if a person has such a relation, they only get kaddish and they don't get malchus. And then there is the general rule, I think it's the 8th klal in the Yud Gimel Midos, that once there is a detail that the Torah teaches us regarding one part of a mitzvah, right? It's not only for that prat, but it's for the entire klal. And according to Rabbi Yitzchak, wherever there is kaddish, there's never malchus. Point B, that our Mishnah B'chlal is not relevant to the topic of Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel. Maybe our Mishnah would hold that if you would get malchus, you wouldn't get kaddish. It's just that you don't get malchus for the violation of Yom Kippur. Number one. Number two, Rav Ashi Amar, maybe afilu tema, our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan, not Rabbi Yitzchak. And yes, if a person had a proper halachic forewarning, and if there were proper witnesses, there is a concept of a person getting malchus for violating Yom Kippur. Nevertheless, it doesn't take away from the ein bain from our Mishnah. When the Mishnah says that if a person violates Shabbos, then zodoinoi bidei adam, that's correct. Because the prescribed punishment for a violation of Shabbos b'mezid is skila. V'zeh, the general prescribed punishment for violating Yom Kippur, meaning dua malach on Yom Kippur, is getting kaddish. Now, is there a unusual scenario where you have a halachic forewarning and you have witnesses, and in that case you'll get malchus? And let me go further. When you get malchus, you don't get kaddish. Yeah, our Mishnah also can hold like Rab Hananya. But the Mishnah is still correct to say, ein bain, this is a doine b'kaddish, b'dei adam, b'ikir, and Yom Kippur is b'ikir, b'dei shomayim, b'kaddish. Right. If there's a scenario where you get out of the kaddish, don't forget malchus is almost like God is merciful. Since you got malchus and you did tshuva, so God will forgive you. But it's a violation for which in principle you're chayiv kaddish. Okay, next Mishnah. From topic to topic to topic to topic. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol nivim dvarim. When we will, God willing, learn Nedarim, we will emphasize the importance of never making vows. It became part of almost Jewish tradition that every Monday and Thursday people say, bli neder, bli neder. Even though many times it Pasha doesn't make sense, the words that they say, but it's good. In the culture where people make vows, where oy gevalt, if you break your vow, you have to be very careful not to break it. Now there were two general vows in where one wanted to make sure that they disconnect from the other. One would be, I'm making a vow that I may not benefit from you. That's a very, very blanket statement. No benefit from you at all. Or I don't want to have any food benefit from you. And as we will learn over here, that food benefit is much broader than you think. Any financial benefit worth a pruta or more is a food benefit. Because the very fact that I didn't have to spend that pruta getting what I'm getting from you gives me another pruta in my pocket to buy food. So says the Mishnah, there is no difference whether someone is prohibited by a vow that he made, that he opted to make. The broader vow, I'm not going to benefit from you. If I limit, it's not such a big limit, but if I limit my neder of hana only to food, like again we quoted that, don't think that if I make a vow, all of the hana, all of the benefit from you, food related, is asur upon me. That will be the actual way I would formulate such a vow. It's much broader than food. Because again, if I receive something from you that otherwise I would have paid for, pruta or more, even if it's not direct food related, it's considered food related. But still there'll be a difference. What will the difference be? The Mishnah gives two examples. One is drisa soregel, setting foot on your property. You know, guys, it's a whole different topic, and Baba Basra will learn that I don't want people to set foot on my property or in my backyard. We're not speaking about that type of property. But if I have a large lands out there in the fields, in the valley, and it's common, normal people, it's called Zenahen of Azelei Chassid, not during the planting season. Yeshua made a takana that everyone should have the right to go through my fields. You're walking through my property. That's something that I don't charge anyone for. So if I make a vow, if you made a vow that you can't have enough food related from me, you can walk through my property. That's not food related because I would not charge you. You're not saving money. And the other example will be v'kelim she'ein oisen behem oichel nefesh. If there is a utensil that I always lend out without charging, says Rashi. That's important. And it's a keli that doesn't make food. Then if the vow was limited to food-related benefit, then you are allowed to use that utensil because it's not food-related. You're not benefiting by not spending money because I never charge anyway. However, if the vow was, I make a vow not to have any hana from my fellow, well, then you cannot have hana by walking through his property. You cannot have hana by using any utensil, even if the owner would never charge anyway. Now let me add another nuance, what Tosfos says. If it's a food-related article, even if I normally would have charged less than a pruta, you still cannot use it because it's food-related. But if the keli is not food-related, this is the key. You can use it as long as the owner never charges for it. Says the Gemara, but if the keli is used for, even indirectly, to make food, no matter how you formulated your vow, you will not be allowed to have benefit. The chiddush here, even if the amount of benefit is less than a pruta. That's the chiddush here. And in other areas of halacha, something that's less than a pruta is of insignificance, not when it comes to vows. If I vowed not to have any food-related benefit from you, and you have this disposable plate, the whole plate is not worth a pruta, and you lend it to me, even if you were to charge, it would be less than a pruta, I can't use it because I made a vow not to have any food-related benefit.
It seems to suggest also it doesn't matter what your intended use of it is, even if your intended use of it is not food-related, because it's a food-related.
That's a good point. If the keli is food-related, you may not use it for anything. Correct. But the big chiddush here, that's what Rashi writes in the Mishnah, is that when I make a vow not to have food-related benefit from you, and you're going to lend me your chair, people would say, well, no problem. No, it is a problem, because if normally that's a service for which I would pay, and even if I would only pay one pruta, and even if I'm paying you a pruta for your chair, but the fact that I'm not paying you the pruta, I have a pruta in my pocket to buy food with the pruta. That's the word. Okay, says the Gemara Drisa Suregel, that if I made this more generic vow not to have any benefit from you, then I can't even walk through your property. Now the problem is, the Gemara is challenging that, why not? Again, if we're living in a society that if you have land out there in the fields, because of the takana of Yeshua and because of just the way things work, you don't mind for people walking through your property. You never charge anyone for it. So what that I made a vow not to benefit from you? Why don't we say that since you never charge for it, it's not even called a benefit? Holokopte inchi. The fact that the owner doesn't mind, maybe it should not even be considered any benefit. So the Gemara says, Amarava, indeed, this is a topic that's subject to Amachloikas Tanoim, and our Mishnah obviously follows Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar, very similar. Guys, we're going to learn these topics when it comes to vows. Listen to the example Rabbi Eliezer is talking about. Let's say I'm a vendor. It's common that vendors, I have a store. I'm selling product. That all my customers, whenever they buy something from me, the vendor adds a vitur. A vitur is a gratuity. It's a bonus. Many people did it also for honesty. Like you bought a pound of whatever, so I always add a little bit. I never charge for that. I do it to everyone. Same scenario. If you made a vow not to benefit from me, are you allowed to accept this gratuity even though I give it to everyone? So that's the Machlokes Tanoim. So the other Tanoim hold, no, you may not. Even though I never charge for it, but you're benefiting something in addition. Rabbi Eliezer holds, and that's Rabbi Eliezer holds, vitur asur b'mudar hana. You may not benefit, you may not receive the gratuity. And that will be the same shita of our Mishnah, that if you make a neder not to have hana in general, if it's not food related. You may not walk through my property even though I don't care about it and everyone does it and I never charge, because you are getting benefit. Now the other Tanoim that argue with Rabbi Eliezer will argue with our Mishnah. And they would hold that when you make a neder not to have hana'ah, if everyone is walking through my fields, so may you. Next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is actually very famous. It's quoted many times throughout Shas. There's two types of vows. There's a vow in which I take the responsibility upon myself. That's called a neder. Or I say, Harei olai, it is upon me to do X, Y, and Z. Really, these are words more connected to an oath. We're not going to get into that right now because an oath is on the gavra. The neder is always an isur on the chefza. You have to know how to formulate the neder in the positive. But anyways, if a person takes upon themselves a neder, so listen, Ariel, I can say, it is upon me to bring a korban. Or I can simply point to an animal and say, this animal is a korban. The latter is called a nedava. I'm pledging a gift, but I'm directing my pledge on an item, not on me. Or it's upon me to do something, and then I designate an animal. And the big difference will be, am I responsible to make up that animal if something happened to it by accident? Whereas if I said this is hareizu, I'm not chayv and achrayis. It's God's loss if something happened. If I said it's upon me, and I designated an animal, well, it's upon me. I got to do it until the end. So, there's no difference between a vow that's known as a neder versus a nedava type of vow, which is a gift type of vow. Ella, shahan, if I make a vow formulating it with the words harei olai, then I'm chayv ba'achrayis, then I am personally responsible to see it through until the end. And if the vow was formulated with the expression, with the words of a nedava, which is directed on the item, then if something happened to the item, I'm not chayiv to compensate for it. I'm not personally liable. Says the Gemara, let's infer from our Mishnah, as far as the violation of Bal Ta'achad in the context of making a vow to give something to the Mizbeach. Chavre, we learned to Sugya in Rosh Hashanah Daf Hey. If you remember, we had a 5-way machloikas tanoim, exactly when are you violating, thou shalt not delay. And the Nukuda says the Gemara, Tanan Hassan, Ezel Neder, Ha'omer Harei Olai Oila. It's upon me to bring an oila. Ezel Nadava, the definition of a Nadava is when I say Harei Zu Oila. And here again, Ma Bein Nadarim Linadavais, if I make a Neder, if it was upon me, and I designated an animal, but then the animal either mesu, the animal died, or it was stolen, or it was lost. Well, I said it's upon me. I got to do it. So then I'm chayiv ba'achri yusan. I am personally liable to bring another animal. But nedavais, if I said from the outset this, then mesu, I nignevu, ayavdu, ein chayiv ba'achri yusan. All right, now Tosfos over here, which is a very important Tosfos, the second to last Tosfos, actually finds another difference. And then he argues with Tosfos' other difference. And that's about, can you use meiser money to fulfill your pledge? And the rule will be that you can use meiser for an adava. You may not use your meiser money, meiser sheni money, for a neder. So l'chayra, that will be another difference. And therefore, Tosfos says, inami the tana v'shir. That's a very important Tosfos, that on the ein bein sugya, when the Mishnah says that there are two things that are similar, and there's no difference between them other than. The other then is not exhaustive. Now, it doesn't take away the fact that the Gemara is inferring, the fact that Mishnah didn't write another difference, it means they're equal. Yeah, the Gemara says that. But wherever the Gemara doesn't say it, it doesn't mean that in everything else they are similar. That's a very important statement, and many Rishonim argue with that. And that's just, it's good to have that information when it comes to this entire Ein Bein Sugya. Let's go back on the Gemara. The Tanach Rabbanan in the beginning of Vayikra, where the pasuk there is speaking about a korban oila, that v'nirtza lo lechaper olav, and it will be accepted for him. That what? That it will atone for him. It could have said v'nirtza lechaper olav, or v'nirtza lo lechaper. So the emphasis will be on the words olav. Olav means for him. Rab Shimon Oimer, that es sha'olav, that whenever a vow was formulated, sha'olav, on me, then you're chayv and achrayis. If it was formulated without making myself liable for it, ve'es she'eino olav, you're not chayv ba'achrayis. Now, my mashma, how does the word olav imply that you made the vow in a way that it's upon you? Olav. So, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Avdimi, going to Amar, olai. Mamash, that's it. Harei olai.
Why is olav more than loy? It's a loy l'chaper, loy and olav. Why is olav more strong than loy? Why do you learn it out from olav?
Olav means that harei olai, Pasha, the words. Olav, that if I made a olav, then I'm chayv and achrayis. If I say olav means olai. Olav means command the troina kaspi dami. If a person says, it's on my shoulders. Until today, there's such an expression, or you have broad shoulders. On me means, the word on me means I'm chayv and achrayis. That's what the word olav means. Okay, next Mishnah. When it comes to the laws of Tum and Tara that we all love learning, and there isn't other than Nida, you don't have Talmud Bavli and Tara, so we have to mamish enjoy it, the little bit that we do have. If a person has any type of seminal emission, whether it is called a normal Balkeri, and the Gemara in Nida, I think it was in Daf Lamed Daled or Daf Lamed Gimel, specifies the texture difference of the semen. Whether it is healthy, whether it is not healthy, whether the person had an erection or not. A person with one such emission becomes a Balkeri. A Balkeri is tummy on the level of a Rishon, and the person gets out of that tumah by simply going to the mikvah and waiting until it gets dark. If a person has another emission, but it's not the normal seminal emission, it's called a Zav emission. Now, if you want to put it into medical terms, there's something called a gonorrheal emission, if that's the correct way of pronouncing it. Danny is going to pipe up in a second. Or the Gemara Nida describes that it leaves the body without an erection, and the texture of that zera is different. It's normally a result of a certain illness. The din is that person, if this is the second emission, which is either going to be on the same day or one day following the other back to back, the person becomes a Zav. A Zav is much worse than a Rishon. He's tummy on a level of an Av. Not only is that person tummy on a level of an Av, but the power of conveying that impurity is beyond the normal Av. There's something called mishkavu moishav, which means that if the zav sits on something, even if it's not direct contact, so like there's 10 mattresses and I sit on the top one, all of them become tummy like me. It becomes, normally when you convey tumah, it goes down a notch. By Yezava, it doesn't go down a notch. If it's mishkavu moishav, there's another unique tumah called tumas heset. Tumas heset means that if I move something indirectly, that means I push a book that pushes a utensil. Even if the utensil is made out of earthenware, and normally the rule by earthenware kalim is they only become tummy if the source of tummy goes in their insides. Here, I caused it to move from the outside, but since I moved the airspace, I moved it all, so it becomes tummy. Tumas heset. That's zav. Then there's another din, that you have to count 7 clean days. 7 clean days for a man in the context to make bedikas, to make sure that you're not having more such emissions. On the 7th day, not after the 7th day finishes. On the 7th day, you have to go to the mikvah, but you can't go to any mikvah. The mikvah that a zav goes to is a mikvah that if he'll go to a mikvah that a nida goes to, it won't be enough. It has to be spring mikvah, mayim chayim. We don't go through these steps today. Now yeah, of course. And now there's something called a zav that had 3 such emissions, also either all on the same day, or on 2 days, or on 3 days max consecutive days. He's also tamei zav. One is called a minor zav, one is called a major zav. What difference is there? So our Mishnah is telling you, ein bein zav haroy shtei re'iyos l'roy shalosh ela lekarbon. They are tamei on the same level of an av. They convey tum on the same level. They both need to have shivas nikiyim. They both have to go to mayim chayim mikvah. The only difference will be is that the karbonos that the Torah speaks about is only if you had 3 such emissions. Infers the Gemara the power of conveying tumah to the level that it doesn't even go down a notch when you sit on something that was meant to be sat upon, when you lay upon something that was meant to be laid upon, even without direct contact, even very indirect contact, but it's holding your weight. And as far as counting 7 clean days, Zev is Shavim, they are both equal. How do we know that? The Tanach Rabbanan, Rebbe Simai Oimer, Chevra, these psukim of Zav, Chevra, is at the end of Mitzvah, of Parshas Mitzvah. It says, Mon HaKosav Shtayim, so I'm reading the pasuk in Rashi. Rashi says, it says, Ish, Ish. Interestingly, Rashi doesn't say Ish, Ish. Rashi says, Ve'ish. Anyways, so Rashi says, Ve'ish ki yeh Zav mipsoroi. So the Torah mentions the word Zav once. Zoivoi, twice. Tamehu, the one verse mentions the word Zav twice. I'm reading inside the Rashi, Hareish Tei Zivois Menuyos Kan, and the Torah calls him Tamei. Back inside Chazal, back inside the Baraisa. And Shalosh, there's another pasuk, Rashi quotes, and I'm quoting from Rashi the pasuk. V'zois tiya tumasoi, count, Bezoivoi, Ror Psaroi, Oi Zoivoi, Oy hechtem b'saroi mizoivai. The Torah uses the words zivus 3 times, and again v'karei tamei. So hakeitzad, says Rab Simoi, shtayim l'tuma. Even only after the second emission, you are tamei again. After the first emission, even if it was this zivus emission, you are only tamei on the level of a balkedi. So just make it clear when we speak about tamei, it's not tamei versus tahor. It's the stringent tuma of Zav, and when you have a third time, that tuma doesn't change. You already became tamei on the higher level. The only difference will be that as at the end of the 7 clean days, you have to bring a carbon. Asks the Braisa on itself, why don't we say that shtayim l'tuma, right, v'loy l'carbon, and when you had the third emission, you only have to bring a carbon, and you're not tamei. Now, how would that be? Like, what's the Havamina? If you became tamei on the more stringent level after 2, how is it that after 3, it would flip? You would have to bring a carbon, but you wouldn't be tamei on that level. Maybe the pshat would be that since you had 3 such emissions, it's ki'ilu igloyim milsa lemafreya, it retroactively redefines it. That's the Havamina, but the Braisa says it can be. Omrat, I'll tell you, before you see 3, you see 2. And if you already have the status of Tuma after 2, that Tuma cannot go away. Why don't we say that the din of 2 is only for a carbon and not for Tuma? But we can say that. We can say that if you have 2 re'iyos, then you have to bring a carbon at the end of the 7 days. Just like after 3. The difference between 2 and 3 is regarding these stringent levels of Tuma. Shalosh afla Tuma. And that's something that you don't see from the psukim that Rab Simoi based his limut from. But the Gemara says, Lo yisal kadaitach. Don't think that because I have another pasuk and another Braisa, the Tanya. Again, these are all psukim from Parshas Mitzvah. It says, "V'chiper olav ha'kohen lifnei Hashem." Now we're speaking about the end, right? The karbanis. This is about the karbanis of Zav. Mi zoivai, taich mi zoivai. From his emission. So many times we have this. Mi zoivai could be interpreted as a exclusionary word. Not always, not every time zivus. From the cases of zivus. Mixa Zavin Miviyim Carbon. The topic of this verse is only connected to some type of zivus. Umixa Zavin Ein Miviyim Carbon. Now that we interpret the mizoivoi as a differentiating letter, sometimes yes, sometimes not. So when yeah, when not, it's logical. So hakeitzad, if you had 3 emissions, then you have to bring a carbon. If you only had 2, then you don't have to bring a carbon. Continues the Braisa asking on himself, maybe not, oy enoi elo, if you see 2, you have to bring a carbon. Same thing. If you see 3, you don't have to bring a carbon. Again, the Havamina would be that if a person is having all these emissions, maybe it's just a medical condition, maybe it's going to retroactively redefine what's happening, but we reject that. Same lunch, Amrat can be. Before you have 3, you have 2. If you're chayiv carbon by your 2, that chayiv cannot just go away. So now that we have a mizoivoi, so from the mizoivoi, we know that the difference between 2 and 3 is regarding a carbon. Not tuma, yes carbon. Now, we have also the psukim that Rabbi Simoi quoted. Why do we need to have both? So the Gemara explains that v'itzrich the Rabbi Simoi, that mana hakosav shtayim and mana hakosav shalosh, and we also have to have the mizoivoi that this Braisa just quoted, explains the Gemara beautifully, because if we only would have had the limud of Rabbi Simoi, havamina, right, we would have still remained with the question that we had, kikushin. What was the question that we had? Maybe the difference is only regarding tuma. Maybe even after 2 times they got to bring a carbon. 2 times a carbon, 3 times a carbon. But Nishkav Moishav and Hesed and all of those chumras is by the 3rd. All the psukim of Rabbi Shimai proves is that there is a difference between 2 and 3, but we don't know where to apply it to. That's why we needed this pasuk of Mizoive, which this pasuk speaks about karbonis. That when does the kohen have to bring kapara? Sometimes. So hold on. So now I know the carbon from this pasuk. So why isn't that enough? The Mizoive, I wouldn't know the numbers. I would know that only sometimes there's a carbon, but not always. But who says it's 2 and 3? So Leidana Kamana is. So Kamash Malan from the psukim quoted by Rabbi Simoi that on the first pasuk the Torah uses the word zav twice. Mana hakasav shtayim. Right? Ve'ishki zav mipsoirei zoivai tamei. There's another pasuk right there that quotes the words zivus thrice, 3 times. So we know that the numbers are 2 and 3. Guys, we got our limit now. In other words, after 2 such emissions, you become a bona fide zav with all of the dinei tuma, with the shivas nekiyim, with the need of going to mayim chayim. The only difference that will happen if you'll have a 3rd or more is that now at the end you got to bring karbanos. Quick, yeah.
They all have to be involuntary, right?
They all have to be involuntary. Well, according to the Gemara Nida, the definition of zava is involuntary, but the lav dafka. Because there are other we have to go back to that sugya nida. If it's about the texture of the zera, then maybe it's about some sort of unhealthy or unusual emission, and maybe that's even if it's voluntary.
And if a rishon or a zav goes into the mikveh or the mayim chayim,
For sure they're good, yeah.
But what happens before it gets dark? Like if there's still daylight?
So what we're going to learn in Amid Beis in the next sugya is a phenomenal concept. I'll say that right now because we have to learn this today, even though it's going to be connected to the next sugya of Mitzvah. Listen to this. Only a nida goes to a mikvah at night. The fact that a woman today counts shivas nekiyim and she goes to the mikvah at night, that's because, right, Rab Zayda says, Benois Yisrael lechmiru alatzman, and they put together the chumras of nidus and zivus for women. But to your point, Bekitzer, a man goes to the mikvah day, on the 7th day. Now, if he'll have an emission on that day after the mikvah, before dark, amazing, this is from God. For certain areas of the Tumah, Mishkav or Moishav, it's going to retroactively undo the mikvah, and anything that he laid upon in between the mikvah, prior to seeing that new emission, will become tamei. Because the new emission on the 7th day will undo the mikvah retroactively. And for some divine reason, Tumas Hesed won't go back retroactive.
But if he doesn't transmit Tuma between it...
I just said he does, other than Hesed.
So then what actually happens once it's dark?
Oh no, once after that emission, he goes back to being a bona fide zav, even though there was one emission. Because it's as if he never got out of the shivas nekiyim. In other words, you only need to have 2 or 3 re'iyos to become the zav. Once you become the zav, you need to have 7 clean days. If you don't have 7 clean days, you continuously remain in the status of a zav. Very much like today, a woman who's a zav gedoyla, we just call a nida. That's a nida that if she has a drop of blood at the end of this, before the mikvah, boom, she's back tummy as mamish the way she was. She needs a new shivas nekiyim. Let's go weiter. Now, says the Gemara, the second braisa learned based on the interpretation that when the Torah says mi zoivoi is limiting. It's a drasha. We differentiate. So now I got a problem. What's the problem? The pasuk says, I'll read the whole pasuk by heart. It says v'chiyitar hazov mi zoivoi. That pasuk is about the shivas nekiyim. Herst v'chiyitar hazov mi zoivoi. V'sofar loy shivas yomim l'taharosoi. And v'chibas begodov and mayim chayim. So now asks the Gemara, it says v'chiyitar hazov mi zoivoi. If it says mi zoivoi, you just said that shivas nekiyim is always needed. You just said that going to mayim chayim is always needed. But hold on, but the pasuk that speaks about the shivas nekiyim uses the mem mi zoivoi. The Gemara says, I'll tell you, we learn, but we don't have to learn the same thing. Let me tell you what we learned from that mizoivah. The chi'itar hazav, meaning, number 1, lichashayifsoik mizoivah. Number 1, he starts to count the shivas nekiyim after these emissions stop leaving his body. And you know what he does not need to do? He doesn't have to go to the mikvah first. And there are other, like a Metzoida, there are other tumais in the Torah that even prior to you beginning to count, you have to do certain things. So rule number one is the moment Mizoivai, the Ziva ended, you can start counting. Now, by the way, you can't start counting on that day. You have to have full days. You count from the next day. Doesn't matter. But you don't have to do anything. Another limud. Mizoivai, a huge limud. V'loi Mizoivai v'nigoi. Chevra, what were to happen if someone is a Zav and a Metzoida? Herst. So one might have thought, how can I count 7 days for the Zivus if I'm still Tameh on the level of a Metzoida? So the Torah writes, Mizoivei, that even if you are also a Metzoida, and the signs of Tzaras did not go away yet, you will remain Tumah on the level of a Metzoida. You are able to resolve the Tumah of a Zivus. Only Mizoivei. It doesn't bother me that you're a Metzoida. Number 3, when it says Mizoivai v'safar, like we said, it says v'chiyitar hazov Mizoivai. Really, in the pasuk there's a comma, and then you say v'safar lo yeshivas yamim. Here we're putting it together. Mizoivai v'safar, 3 lines from the bottom. Limeid alzov bal shtei de'iyos. Even if he only had shtei de'iyos, what we're learning, he also needs to have shivas nekiyim. Now, for this last one, asks the Gemara, why did we need that? Why wouldn't we say it on our own? The same din. Of course, if you have 2 de'iyos, you have to count 7 clean days. You know why? Because we just established above from Rab Simoi that even only after 2 de'iyos, you are tamei on the stringent level. So if you're tamei on that level, why do you need to have shivas nekiyah? But imetame mishkav u'moishev lo yiyaton sfira shiva. So why did the Braisa have to learn Mizoivai v'safar for something that it would have known logically? Daf Chesamid Beis. Doesn't get more exciting than this. Answers the Gemara, no it doesn't. You would not have known it logically. And the proof is from Hashem Hashem kenegayim techiyach. So again, there's many details that there's not enough time to speak out, but very brief. That really midin Torah, when a woman has her period, she enters 7 days of nidus. During those 7 days, whether she's bleeding throughout all of it or only in the beginning, it's called the days of nida. And midin Torah, she doesn't have to count shivas nekiyim. Midin Torah, she can bleed 7 days straight until shkia. As long as it stops by shkia, she makes a hefsek tada and she goes to the mikveh that night. And then the subsequent 11 days are called days of zivus, in which if she sees nothing, she remains muteres labayla and tahira. But if she sees dam during those 11 days, it depends. If she sees dam on 1 day, then she only has to count 1 clean day. Shemeres yom keneged yoim. If she sees dam on 2 days, she only has to count 1 clean day. If she sees dam on 3 consecutive days, by the way, not like the Zov, that if he has 3 seminal zivus emissions on the same day, he becomes a major Zov. It can also be on 3 consecutive days, but it can be on the same day. By a woman, it has to be dafk on 3 separate days. Then she becomes a Zava Gedoyla and she has to count Shivas Nekiyim. Point is that when a woman is Shemeres Yom Keneged Yoim, during that day, you know how Tameh she is? She's Tameh on the level of a Zava Gedoyla, but she doesn't eat 7 clean days. In other words, we know from the din of Shemeres Yom Keneged Yoim that just because you are Tameh on that high stringent level, it doesn't necessarily always mean you have to count 7 clean days. She goes during the day, and a Zava Gedoyla goes during the day, and we learned Tanida, but the husband should not have a relation with her until nightfall, like you mentioned, Ariel, because if she were to see dam after the mikvah, before nightfall, it's going to retroactively take away the mikvah. Weiter. Now, shemetama mishkav u'moishev ve'einoi te'una sfira shiva. So without the mizoivai v'safar, one might have thought that maybe a zav, who would only see 2 de'iyos, even though we already established from Rab Simoi shemetama mishkav u'moishev, maybe lo yeton sfira shiva. That's why the Braisa learned the 3rd limud, mizoivai v'safar, that mizoivai v'safar mix azoivai, even though it's only a little bit of a zav, which means not 3, only 2, still you need to have a safar. Limit al zav bal shtei de'iyos, sheto'on sfira shiva. Gevaldik, first wide line. Amalei arav papala bayem. Maishna hai mizoivai, that you just mentioned, mizoivai v'safar. The mizoivai, which is actually including, it's the marbi beis of bal shtei de'iyos. Yet, what did we learn in the beginning? The second brisa that we brought on Amad Aleph, that mizoivai is being memayit zov bal shtei de'iyos from the pasuk of a chipper. So is mizoivai differentiating and excluding, or is mizoivai including? It's not aligned, it's the opposites. So the Gemara answers, really, mizoivai should limit, like we had on the Braisa. Chiper, only when you had 3. If you have 2, you don't need to have a carbon. But in this verse, you have to interpret the mizoivai to include him in Shivas Nakiyim. Amalei, Isal Kadai Tachai is also as it normally should be. Lima Utehuda Asa, which means, if the Pasuk would want to tell you that if you only had 2 ears, you don't need Shivas Nakiyim, you know what the Pasuk should do? Nothing. Lishtai Kraminei. The Pasuk doesn't need to write the word mizoivai at all. And I would have known that what? I would have known that you don't count Shivas Nakiyim. Right? If you're going to say Asya Medina, if you're going to say no, you need to have a Shivas Nakiyim like we said before, because if you're Tamei, you by default need a Shivas Nakiyim. We wouldn't have said that. We just said Shemeres Yom Keneged Dirim is the biggest raya that even people that have a Tuma Chamura, sometimes they don't need Shivas Nakiyim. Shemeres Yom Keneged Dirim Techiach. Gevaldik. And therefore, the fact that the Torah writes a word that's not needed, in this context, it must mean not to exclude, but here it means to include. Now hold on, didn't we learn other things from this mizoivai? How would the Torah even have an option not to write it? Like we learned before, what does the Bach say? From mizoivai uminigai. So you need to have that mizoivai. So answers the Gemara, no. Im kein licht of kra v'chiiter hazov. Don't write the words. We will learn it from the Zav. You see what Zav means? Zav means even if you are a Mitzayra and you're not yet getting out of your tzaras, it doesn't matter. Only focus on the Zav. We would have learned it from the word Hazav, and we did not need the Mizoivai, Lamadli. So in our context, the Mizoivai limit al Zav is that you have to count 7. The Mizoivai is coming to include and next to exclude. And therefore, just coming back, so we authenticated, we gave the sources to the statement that Ein Bein Zav, Haroya Shteira Iyos, Laroya Shalish, Elo Carbon. Next sugya is even more exciting. So let's go to Parshas Tazria now. What's Parshas Tazria? So there are different types of tzaras. Danny is so excited that he's one big Danny on the screen over here. That you have, let's speak about tzaras of the person. And they're all different types of signs. But let's speak about, in a very generic way, there is the general symptom of the skin becoming whited, or the skin lost its pigment, which is really what happened, but mamish lost its pigment. And then on top of that, there was something in addition. One example would be that in that location, after the skin turned white, dafka after the skin the hairs turned white. If you have some hairs coming out of your skin, first the skin and then the hair. What happens if a person, now there's so many details, how large of an area, it has to be the size of a gris. A gris is an area in which 36 hairs can grow. You have the gris area, but no hair white. That will be one example where some symptoms are properly there. Like if the skin is white, but it's not even in the minimum size, it's garnished. But if the skin has the right size of whiteness and the right shade of white, it's very white, but the other symptoms are not there, so the pasuk says that the kohen is going to declare that person into a mitzayra musgar. Musgar means he's like quarantined. Mamash like today, quarantine means we're not certain. We're not confirming you, but it happens to be that when you are in quarantine, you're already tummy. That's so pashit. You are tummy. But then, now, the kohen waits 7 days. If the kohen comes back, obviously if the signs went away, you're out. You have to go through a purification process, because once you are declared quarantined, you're tummy. With one exception. As the Mishnah will speak about the exceptions. If it remained the same, then you're another week of quarantine. That's why Zelu Umazen, the Meshuggah world today, you're hearing quarantining for 7 days, and now you go with the new variant, 14 days. All this is from the Torah. There's a concept of 14 days quarantining, never more than 14 days. To you governments out there, you don't have no source in the Torah. If it remained the same, it didn't get worse. It didn't get better. It didn't get worse. After 14 days, by default, you're gonna get out of your quarantine. Again, since you were Tama, you have to do many steps, but not all the steps. Now, if it got worse, then you're going to be considered a confirmed mitzvah. Musgar, hezger means quarantined or confined. You're confined. You have to go mechutz lamachna. And muchlat means ches, like you're done. It's worse. Now, they're both tummy. we're saying that in this context, quarantining doesn't mean that we don't know what you are, and if we're going to clarify that you're not, you're good to go. Not like that. Once, even though you are only confined, you're tamei. Says the Mishnah, ein bein mitzoida musgar, only being confined. Versus the worst step, being a mitzoida muchlat, being confirmed. Once you're confined, you're tamei. Ella priya uprima. Priya means you have to let your hair grow. That's a punishment from the Torah's perspective. And prima means you have to rent or rip your garments. These two pratim, and really the pasuk continues, va'al sfasam yata, I think that's the lashon, that you have to wear your cloak all the way up to your lips. And the tamei yikra, there's a hemshech pasuk that also only goes to the mitzoida muchlat. The Mishnah is not mentioning the remaining of the pasuk. So these details, in other words, a mitzoida that's only musgar is not bound by the laws that he can't cut his hair. But during the purification process, we'll see he undergoes the same purification process. That's tuma, before the purification process. So they're both equally tamei. And I'll give you an example. You know how tamei a mitzoida is? A mitzoida not only is matama mishkav moishev, but if a mitzoida enters a home, all the items in the home become tamei. That's called tumas bia. And that is both by a musgar and by a muchlat. So the tumah is the same. Now, ein bein tahar mitoy chesed, l'toyer mitoy chechlet. What happens during the process of becoming tahar? There's so many details, there's not enough time to talk it out. There is the shaving of the hair before the 7 clean days. There is the bird ceremony in the beginning of the 7 days. Then you have at the end of the 7 days, again the shaving of the hair and a whole Megila. So Ella, the shaving of the hair and the bird ceremony is only done if the mitzoida became confirmed. If you only became confined, you don't need the teglachas and the tziparim. But all else you need, says the Gemara, again, let's make an inference. Shiluach v'tuma. Shiluach means that a mitzoida has to be sent out of all the 3 camps. That means he can never live in a halachically walled city. At least we have a link between Purim, between Megillah, because the definition of a walled city here also is a city that was walled from the times that Yeshua conquered the land of Israel. And Tumah means this very high level of Tumah. Let's leave it, it's very high level of Tumah, including, like we said, Tumah's Bia. So they're equal. Zevazeh Shavin, by the way, Zevazeh Shavin means they're both equally Tamei. Zevazeh L'chumra. Now asks the Gemara, Minohanamili. You know, it's important just to help up. The Minohanamili is not on the inference from the Gemara. It's not on the Zevazeh Shavin L'chumra. How do you know that a mitzoida that's only musgar is not bound by the law of priya and prima? That's the question. Approach number 1, a brayso that was taught in the yeshiva of Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, and he repeated it in front of Rav Huna, that when it says, this pasuk, very important, if you don't know the psukim, you're not going to chap the Gemara. This pasuk is not about the muchlat. This pasuk is about the musgar. This pasuk is about a person who's only, so to say, only confined, only quarantined. It says that v'tiharoi hakoyin, like we mentioned, not because it got better, simply because it didn't get worse. And you know what the Kohen says? Mispachasi. Mispachas means, it's only a skin disease. It's not the halachic tzora'as. However, you know what you would think? You would think, 1 second, it's only a skin disease. It doesn't mean that retroactively you were never tummy. The pasuk says, you remain your tummy. And you have to undergo a purification process. Now the word v'toher, that will be a new Torah Shabbat Peh. This is unique. V'toher is to be understood past. If future means v'yitor, if it only would have meant that after you wash your garments and go to the mikveh, from now on you become pure, the Torah would have says v'yitor. V'toher means there's some sort of retroactive. So what it means is that there are 2 details, there are 2 laws that you never needed to keep. Not retroactive, now we found out. Never. Since you were only musgar, tahar mi priya uprima de meikar. You were never mechuyev, right, to let your hair grow. You were never obligated to rend, to tear your garments with all the pratim that we learn in the Rambam regarding the mitzvah. Amalei Rava, v'tahar means retroactive. In this way, retroactive means, see, Ariel, there's like this. There's from now on retroactive. This v'toir is much more than that. This v'toir means that you were never bound by certain rules. Mamish lemafreya. When it comes to the Zav, and now we're going to go back to the Zav, where it says v'chibis begadav, not v'yitar. V'chibis begadav v'toher. So Hassan mai v'tor mikaraika. There is no retroactive. We just said in our Mishnah and Daf Amad Aleph that a Zav that has Torah Iyas is completely Tamei. As far as Tuma and V'toher, he's mamish as Tamei as. But I'll tell you what it means. Elot means Toher Hashtam Elatami Kli Cheres Beheseit. So that was the Hashgacha Pratis, Ariel, that we already explained what this means. So I guess when the Zav, even to the ears, if he moves even a Kli Cheres, he makes a Tamei. Question is, again, it's the seventh day. He already went to the mikvah. He moved Klei Cheres, and before the end of the seventh day, he has another remission. That this new emission brings him back to the state of Zav for sure. Does it go back retroactive for Tumas Mishkov Moishav? Yes. Yes, meaning that if there's, let's say I'm a Zav, and I went to the mikvah, and then I lay down on my couch, and I got off my couch, and then I had a new emission, my couch is tummy. But the hesed that happened between mikvah and new emission remains tahar. That's the v'tahar. So we're teaching the v'tahar also. For some concept, my tahara remains in the past. For Mishkav Moishav, retroactively I uprooted my taharas. But for Hesed, and that's enough to justify the past tense of a tahar. Asks the Gemara, why don't we teach the tahar here by the kohen, by the Metzoira Musgar from another din? What happens? A guy's a Metzoira, same thing. Musgar. The din is, we said, he's just as tamei as the muchlet. He walked into a house. Everything in the house becomes tamei. What happens if it's on the seventh day? The signs were going away. He went into a house and everything is started. And then the signs came back. And the signs came back that he's going to become a muchlet now. So why don't we say that the tar only means that all of the items in the home that he entered before he became the muchlat doesn't retroactively become tamei. But nothing more than that. So don't use the word v'tar to understand that priya and prima never were chal on him. So therefore Rava rejects that answer. So Rava is back to the question from what's the source in the Torah that the requirement of priya and prima is only on the muchlat. And when it says this is about the psukim regarding the healing of a mitzvah. Asher boy hanega, etc., etc. The pasuk actually writes that's the pasuk that speaks about priya and prima, right? So asher boy hanega. Asher boy hanega means mishat soratoi tuluya begufei. Someone whose tuma is an exit of tuma is all about whether the signs of his bodies will get better or not, which is what happens to a muchlet. If you are mitzvah muchlet, the only way you can begin the purification process is if the simanei tzoras leave. And by a musgar, like we mentioned, a musgar leaves the state of musgar even if nothing left, even if nothing diminished. Simply by the fact that you were 1 week and then another week in the state of muskat and it didn't get worse, just time will make you pure. So the whole pasuk that's speaking about priya and prima is regarding someone asher boy hanega, someone whose nega and tuma depends on what's happening to his body. Yatzah the musgar she'ein tzaratet tluy begufay. Ela b'yamim. That's the raya of Rava. So Amalei Abaya, hold on. Ela ma'ata, when it says kol yemei asher nega boy yitma. This is the pasuk that's speaking about the obligation of a mitzvah being kicked out of the three machnas. And what does the pasuk say? Kol yemei asher nega boy. So why don't we say only mishat tzaratet tluy begufay? He needs to be sent out. V'she'ein tzaratet tluy begufay, which is the musgar ein toin shiluach. And maybe indeed so, that's the first line in the Gemara. It's not so. And v'chitema no, v'haktani ein bein, mitzayda musgal mitzayda muchlat, ela priya uprima, and the Gemara began by telling you hala'i and shiluach, as well as ulatamoya bebia, zev is a shavan that they convey tuma. So Amalei, the Torah could have said, Yemei asher negaboy. The Torah adds the words kol, Yemei, kol Yemei, kol Yemei, l'rabis mitzayda musgar l'shiluach. So basically what we are saying is that musgar is excluded from priya and prima because it says boy. In other words, wherever the Torah doesn't say boy, Chavra, what's the premise? If you don't have the boy, then you cannot exclude the musgar. So oi bazoi, when it comes to the obligation going into the Tara of shaving the hair and the birth ceremony, the Torah never uses the words boy, fashtei shleima. So why are we excluding the musgar? My tamaloi. And how do you know not? It says in our Mishnah, Ein bein Torah m'toich cheskel lo Torah m'toich echlot ela teglachas v'tziparim. But why are we saying that teglachas and tziparim also doesn't go to the musgar? The Torah doesn't say boy. Amar Abaye, Amar Kra, there's another pasuk. It says v'yatza kohen el mechutz lamachna. And what does he see? V'hinei nirpa negat soras. You know what nirpa means? It got better. Again, who is the one that needs for the signs to get better? Only the muchlat. The muskar doesn't need it for it to get better. The muskar only needs for it not to get worse. Mishat tzarate tolei b'refuasai is included in the parsha of Tiglachas and Siparim. Yatzazeh, she'ein tzarate tolei b'refuas el b'yamim, he's excluded, and therefore that's the ein bein, that he doesn't have to not shave his hair, nor bring the birds. It's a chaval that we finished the sugya. And tomorrow we're coming back to a more familiar sugya about writing Sifrei Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzos, a lot more to be continued.